Hello, and welcome to this bonus lesson. So in the regular workshop, I used paper and tracing paper to show the exercises and the theory behind these ideas. But if you're used to using a computer, you probably thought that it would be quite simple to translate these ideas into a computer-based approach. So using a drawing tool such as Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator, and any tool that uses vector graphics would be a great way to explore this. So in this little bonus exercise, I'm going to show you how to do that with a simple worksheet. Now, this worksheet is for Inkscape, and I'll explain at the end of the video some limitations of using it in Adobe Illustrator. But the general ideas that I'm showing here are things that could translate to any drawing tool. And I'd also like to make a shout out or a thank you to Yoka Paul for posting a template. This is my own template, but she posted one similar to this on the news group, and for encouraging me to show you a computer-based version of this. So let's get started. For the first part of the lesson, I'm going to show you three things. One is how to remove an intersection, as we did for creating larger holes. The second is how to add an intersection for making new crossings. And the third is how to take a triangle and turn it into a three-way crossing. So here we have a worksheet. On the left, you can see a template, and this should be very familiar. There's a grid that looks just like the handouts that I gave you. There's a frame with red mountains and valley peaks and blue arrows facing left and right on the sides, and lines in the middle. So we're going to move these lines around in order to create new intersections and to remove intersections. Now around this template, I have 9 copies, and these are the spreadsheet arrangements using BDP and Q. Now I'm using a feature in Inkscape called the clone, and what it does is it takes your original copy and we make cloned copies of it so that any changes you make to the original also show up in the clones. And the clones can be rotated and reflected according to the pattern that we want. So we just edit the one place and it shows up everywhere. I've also created results for shifting the rows and shifting the columns, and I've done that using the layers tool. So you can see the layers by going into layer and clicking on layers ... and it'll open this layers dialog. So currently we're looking at spreadsheets, but I can click on this eye to hide those and click on the eye beside shift row to see examples where we're just shifting the row. And if I hide that, I click on this eye beside shift column and I can see the results for shifting the columns. I've broken it up into these different layers so that you're not looking at too many things at once. And so you can easily see the results of your changes. And it's pretty quick to flip back and forth between the different layers to see the different results. Okay, so now let's have a look at adding, removing, and creating three-way crossings. So I'm just going to zoom in here so we can have a closer look at what's going on. So here's my template. If I click on that, I can see down below that it's a group of 5 objects. So it's important that it's a group because the clone is actually of the entire group. Now we can add things to the group or remove things to the group, and they will show up in all of the cloned copies. So it's important that we have a group. So when we're editing a group, we first have to enter the group. And there's many ways you can do that. One is to double click on the group. Another is to select the group, and then in the right mouse menu, you can select Enter Group down here at the bottom. There we go. Okay, and in the group, we'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 paths, and you can see down below that they're paths. I'm just going to color them in different colors so you can see them more easily. So there's one. There's another one in cyan. Make one blue and one magenta. And right away, you can see that these color changes that I've made here also show up in the cloned copies of it. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is make a bigger hole by removing this intersection. So we can see this intersection comes from the cyan path and the blue path. So first I'm going to click on the cyan path, and I'm going to go into my node tool. So this is a tool for editing the nodes of a path. And once I've done that, you can see that I have a node at each of the places where the path turns. I'm going to click on the node that's right where the intersection I want to remove is, and I can either click on the delete button, or I can come over here in the top left corner to this delete selected nodes button and click on that. And as you can see, after I've deleted the node, it's not there, but the path is kind of curved. And what I really would like is it to be straight. So I'm going to select that path again, and I'm going to click on the curve between these 2 points. And when I click on that curve, it selects the node above and below that curve. So both of those nodes are selected. And to straighten that line out, I'm going to use this tool, which is make selected nodes a corner. So it's just going to straighten things out. So if I click on that, instead of being a curved line, it's now a straight line between those 2 points. I'm going to do the same thing with this blue path. So I select the path, I click on the node that's at the intersection, I remove it, and then I click on the curve and I straighten it out using this little tool. Okay, so now I've removed that intersection and we can see our hole here, and we can see in the various clones that the hole also shows up. Okay, now I'm going to create a new intersection. So let's add a new intersection here. And the way I'm going to add the intersection is a little different from how I did it in the lessons. Instead, what I'm going to do is sort of the reverse of what I did to remove this node. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a node in the middle of this line. So I'm going to use this green line and this cyan line. And I'm going to put a node in the middle of them and pull them towards the center dot. So what I do is I click again on that green line, and it selects the 2 points at the ends of that line segment. And this time I come over here to the top left corner and I use this tool, which is insert new node. And it puts a new node right in the middle. Now it has selected all 3 of those nodes, and I only want to move one of them. So I'm going to click away so that it's not selected, and then click on the node that I want to move, and it turns blue, and then I drag it. I drag it to the center of that diamond, and conveniently there's a little dot there. And so you may have noticed that my node snapped to that dot. So if you notice here on the right-hand side, Inkscape has snapping tools. So I turn the snapping tool on with this button, which you can see is grayed out, meaning it's on. And I'm using 2 features. The first one is this, which is snap custom nodes. So that means the nodes themselves will start snapping. And I'm also using this tool, which is snap center of objects. So the dot in the middle of my diamond is a circle, and I want to snap to the center of that circle. So that's how that works. So I'll do the other side now, this lower cyan line. So I'll do the same thing. So I click on the cyan line that I want to put the intersection in. It selects these 2 nodes at the beginning and end. I click on insert new node. I could also just click on the insert button on my keyboard. It does the same thing. I click away so nothing is selected. I click on the node I want to drag, and then I drag it, and it just snaps to the other one. So here I've created a new intersection. Let me just do that one more time. So I'm going to create a new intersection here, and I'm going to use, let's say, this magenta line and this blue line. So I click on the magenta line, click on it again so that the nodes are selected, insert a new node, click away to select everything, click on that node to select it, and drag it to the dot. Similarly, I click on the blue path, I click on the line segment I want to use, insert a new node, click away so nothing is selected, click on the node I want to drag, and drag it. All right, now everything has snapped into place, and I have these 2 new intersections, and you can see them in the clones as well. So here's one intersection, and here's another new intersection, and here's my big hole. All right, so the third thing I want to show you is how to create a three-way crossing. So to start with, this is just to show you where I'm doing it. So I'm going to take this triangle. So you don't have to actually fill the triangle in. I'm just doing this in order to show you what I'm thinking of. So here where I have this yellow triangle, I want to turn that into a three-way crossing. And we can see there are three pairs coming in. So this green, cyan, and blue are incoming pairs. And the outgoing pairs are this green, cyan, and blue one. So what I'm going to do is select all three of those paths. And I'm holding the shift key down as I click on the path to do a multi-selection. Okay, so I've selected green, cyan, and blue. And now I'm just going to drag a box, oops, too big. I'm going to drag a box around that triangle. So I'm only getting the nodes that are on that triangle. And that's going to select all the nodes from the green, blue, and cyan paths. And we look down here, we can see that there are 6 nodes selected. So 2 in the top corner, 2 in the bottom left corner, and 2 on the right side, right corner. And now I'm going to use the alignment tool. So come here to Object, Align and Distribute. Okay, and because I'm using the node tool, I get to align nodes, and I can choose where they're going to align. So I can align them from various different places. I'm going to say middle of selection, which is going to be the middle of that box around the triangle. And first I'm going to align them in the horizontal direction and then in the vertical direction. So you can see now they've all snapped together, and I'll click away so you can see it better. They've all snapped together into this one point. All right, so that is how I can play with it. Now I can maybe get rid of this yellow triangle so we don't need that anymore, just to show you what the pattern looks like. And again, I can go into the different layers and see what it looks like when we shift rows or columns. And if you want to play around with shifting rows, let me zoom out so I can see it better. Let's take an interesting example. The pattern itself is a group, and if I double click on it to enter the group, I get different rows. And so I can take each row and I can play around with sliding it back and forward to see what it looks like in different arrangements. And similarly with columns, when you go into the columns, you'll see, double click on the group, you'll see vertical columns of the patterns, which you can just drag to rearrange and try different arrangements of that. Okay, what I'm going to show you now is how to modify the template itself. So I'm just going to revert back to the original file so that I don't have all my changes there. So you can just see a simple file. And let me zoom back out to show you the whole worksheet. Okay, so what I want to do now is modify this template to be larger or smaller. And again, I'm going to zoom in on the template so we can get a better look at it. Okay. All right, so here's my template. And if I look over here in the layers dialog, I can see that I have the template, which is just the lines and the letter. But I also have a layer called frame, which is the mountains, valleys, and the sides, and the grid. So the first thing I want to do is change the shape of the frame. And it might be useful here just to get rid of the template. So you can just make it invisible by clicking on the eye. So you're just looking at the frame. The other thing we want to do is this frame is locked. And the reason it's locked is because when you're playing with the adding and removing intersections, you don't want to accidentally move the frame. But now if we're going to change the size of the template, we'll need to change the frame. So click on this little lock to unlock the frame. Now we can click around in the frame and select different parts. What you'll see is that the frame is made up of arrows, so mountains and valleys and left pointing and right pointing arrows. So let's say I want to make it bigger. So I'm going to drag this up a little bit and I'm going to make it wider. So what I want to do is duplicate. I want to create another mountain peak. So I select the mountain peak and I want to make a copy, but I don't just want to use the normal copy because it doesn't copy everything. I'm going to use duplicate. This is a good tool to use instead of copy because it gets all of the attributes of the object. So duplicate, and now I have a second copy on top of the first and I can just drag it. Then let me duplicate it at the bottom. There, now I have two valleys. And then I'm going to, I'm going to drag the sides over so they're aligning up. And then I just need to put one more arrow on each side. And I can use Control D is the same as duplicate. So I've just typed Control D and Control D on the other side to duplicate. Okay, so here is my new frame. So this is the size of template I want to make. And now let's make that template visible again and see what we've got. Okay, so I have some lines, but they're not nearly big enough to fill in the whole template. So what I want to do is create bigger ones. So I come to my template and I double click to enter the group. And I'm going to start with the left one. I'll just color that one green so you can see it, see what I'm doing. I come to my node tool, and there are many ways to do this, but I will just show you one. What I want to do is create a zigzag path that goes all the way to the top. So I'm just going to grab the top node from the zigzag path that's there and stretch it up to the top. And if I click on that section in between the two last nodes and insert a new node, and then I can drag that node into the zigzag and repeat that process, insert a new node and drag that node. So now I've completed my zigzag. And I can do the same with this next path. So I take the end and drag it up to the top to complete the zigzag, insert a node, insert another, oops, wrong key, insert another node. All right, so now I have two zigzags. And I could keep going and modify these ones, but actually I've done most of the work. So what I'm going to do is come back to my selection tool here, the arrow, and I'm going to delete the other two paths here. And now I'm just going to create duplicates. So edit, duplicate the green and magenta path once. And I need one more to fill in this template. Okay, so there I have my new template. And I can color in the paths different colors so you can see that they're all different. Shall I make that gray and make that one orange? Okay, so I've created a larger template. If I come out and look at the entire page, I'm not actually seeing what I would like to see. If I look at each one of these clone arrangements, it hasn't actually grown in size. So the template's bigger, but the arrangement of the individual clones hasn't changed. So there's a whole bunch of overlap going on here. And I'm just going to zoom in on one so you can see it. So you can see this orange path starts here, but then it gets hidden behind the blue because there's some overlap going on. So we want to rearrange them so that they are all sitting snug up against each other like a spreadsheet. So click on the pattern and then double click so that we enter into the group. So now if I select everything in the group, I can see I have 16 objects. So 4 rows and 4 columns of objects. The tool I'd like to show you is called Arrange. So under the Object menu, you can use Arrange. And this Arrange tool allows me to arrange things in rows and columns, just like a spreadsheet, so that's perfect. It doesn't matter what you say here in the middle. You can pick any one of these. All of our shapes are the same shape, so it doesn't actually matter whether you align their centers or their corners. But what I want to do is set the spacing so that the copies overlap each other a little bit. If I set the spacing as 0, then there's a tiny little gap and it doesn't look quite right. So instead of the gap, let's say we make our spacing half the width of the line. So the lines in these clones are 1 pixel wide. So I'm going to make this half a pixel wide. And I put a negative at the front of it so that there's an overlap. If I don't have the negative, there'll actually be a gap of half a pixel between them. So I want there to be a negative gap or an overlap. Now, unfortunately, Inkscape has a bug. So if I click Arrange at this point, it looks nice. It's laid everything out like a spreadsheet. But you'll notice that instead of, I'm expecting BQ, BQ, I get BB, QQ. And if I hit Arrange again, I get some other random ordering. So the bug is that Inkscape doesn't respect the order in the original one. So let me just back up. So here I have, before I hit Arrange. So I'm going to show you a little workaround. Hopefully in the future, this workaround won't be required. But for the moment, bear with me. So I'm going to use the same tool we used before, Align and Distribute. And this tool has a little option, which is Remove Overlaps. So it gets rid of all the overlap between objects. Now, by default, the values here are 0, 0. And that isn't actually completely getting rid of the overlap. They touch side by side, and Inkscape has a problem with this. So I'm just going to pick some number. It doesn't actually matter too much how big you make it. I've had good success with 20 pixels in between. And so now when I click on this arrangement remove overlap button, oops, it says move object as little as possible so that their bounding boxes do not overlap. So I'll click on that. And so it moves them around. They're not in a nice spreadsheet exactly, but they're not overlapping. And then I can come back to this arrange. And now when I click on the arrange button, and I'll just drag them, oops. I'm going to drag it over here so you can see it better. Now they're nicely arranged like rows and columns, and you can verify that it kept the BQ, BQ, so BQ, BQ. And if you zoom in, you're not going to see any gaps between them. So zooming right in, they touch really nicely right up against one another. So I fixed this arrangement, but I have to do all 9 arrangements on this sheet in the same way. So let me just do another one so you can get the feel of it. All right, so here is my arrangement. It's a group, so I double click to enter the group and select all of the things in the group. You can use Control A or you can use Edit, select all in order to select everything in the group. Now I go to the Align and Distribute and remove the overlaps with some kind of gap, like 20 pixels. And then I come to the Arrange dialog, and I'm going to arrange them in 4 rows and 4 columns because that's what I have in my little pattern. And I'll just drag that over here so it lines up with the label. And then just double check BD, BD, DB, DB. Yep, everything looks good. And you'd continue that way for all 9 of the patterns. I'm just going to show you for the rows is slightly different. So here I've come to the shifting row arrangements. And so let me zoom in on one of these. Because these guys are arranged as rows, when I enter the group, you'll see that I have another group, which is all the objects, all the copies in a row. So I need to enter that group again. And here, if everything is in one row, you typically don't have to do the align and distribute. You don't have to remove the overlap. You can just go directly to the arrange. The caution is you have to make sure that these guys should be in one row. And so you'll have to change it to 1 row by 4 columns and click arrange. And when I go to the next one, it has again changed it back to 2 by 2. It always does that, which is a little annoying. But anyway, remember to put it back to 1 row. and the third one, and the fourth one. One row, arrange. Okay, and now let me zoom out a little bit better so you can see the whole thing. I still need to make some fine adjustments, so I may have to go in here and grab a row and drag it so that it lines up nicely. So drag, see these ones are overlapping, drag it so it lines up nicely. And this one is overlapping as well. So you may have to just go in and drag them around. Usually you do if you've made the template quite a bit bigger, quite a bit smaller. All right, so that's rows. And a similar thing happens with shifting the columns. The difference here is that when you enter the group, instead of having rows, you're going to have columns. So when you enter that group and select everything in the column, when you come to arrange, you want to say that everything is in one column instead of one row. So we have one column and then arrange it. And then you'll have to drag them and line the columns up. And it's always a good idea just to go back to the label and make sure everything looks as you expected. So it should go, oh, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, I did. So it should go B, and this one shifted down and Q, and then shifted down B, and then shifted down Q. Yep. And do that for all of the patterns in here as well. Let me just quickly cover making your template smaller so you have an idea of what that looks like. So again, I'm going to hide my template and come in here and look at my frame. So I can just delete parts of my frame and drag them around till I have a proper diagram, maybe something like that. All right, so I've made this smaller frame. And now when I show my template, I have too many paths here. It's way too big. So again, I come into the group, and to start with, I can delete some of these paths because they're outside of the frame, or this one is overlapping with the frame. So delete that one. And here I have a path that's too long. So I'm going to go into the node tool and just start deleting nodes until it fits in the frame. So there it fits in the frame now. Okay, so now I have my template inside. And again, you'll see that the pieces are not lining up in the arrangements. So I'm going to have to come in here and do the same thing that I did before. Select everybody and use my arrange. One thing I should go back to my template. You'll see how my letter B is just outside of the frame. So go back to my template. You want to keep your letter inside, otherwise it's going to cause alignment problems. So you can just drag it to somewhere in there. And if you don't like the letter, you can delete it and only add it back when you're checking your alignments. Or you can make it really, really small so you can hardly see it, and then make it large when you need it. Okay, so going back. So here I'm going to resize this one just to show you how it works. So again, I go into the group, select everything in the group, and come to my align and distribute to make sure I have no overlaps. And even though it's made everything bigger, there's still some overlaps. So you want to get rid of anything like that. So align and distribute, remove overlaps, and click on that button. And then go to arrange. And I want to make this so I have 4 rows, and each row has 4 columns. So 4 rows by 4 columns. make sure I have that half a pixel overlap, and just click on arrange. And then you can see it nicely follows the pattern. Okay, so that's basically how to use the worksheet. I mentioned some comments about Adobe Illustrator. So Adobe Illustrator has a feature that's similar to the clone in Inkscape, and the feature is called Symbol. Unfortunately, when you import an SVG file into Adobe Illustrator, where the clones have been created, they use a tag called SVG use. So that's the SVG cloning tag. And it turns all of those clones into complete copies. So they're no longer linked to the original. They just creates an inline copy of the original in place. So basically it removes all of the linking that you get. So if you're using Adobe Illustrator, you can use this template as a guideline about how to go about it, but you should recreate your own template using this symbol. So the symbol, as far as I understand it in Adobe Illustrator, is you create some objects and you group them as a symbol, and then you can create copies from that symbol, and any changes you make to the symbol are reflected in the copies. Very similar to the idea of clones used in Inkscape. So unfortunately, I don't own Adobe Illustrator, so I can't create a template for you for that. But I think you understand the process and can easily create your own. Well, I think that completes the explanation I wanted to give you about working with a digital version of the exercises. And I hope you have a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing your results.